Hello, BookTube. We're continuing my library tour. We're in the middle of this west wall, and we're doing books about publishing, books about authors. And we're going to start. This is the last shelf I'm going to be able to do while I'm just comfortably standing. After this, I'm going to have to sit down or squat down in puppy territory. But for now, we have two transverse books that we'll do, and then the shelf itself. So the first one we have is, well, this is from the 1950s, I think. 1953. This is Van Wyck Brooks. This is The Writer in America. A pompous author, an author very much prone to windifying, but he can be very good. And his digressions, his offhand comments, even on the big, portentous subjects that he liked to take on, his offhand comments are often wonderful. So I do find myself rereading him. Okay, all right. This is the literary poobah, the Atlantic Monthly, or the Knopf, or the New Yorker. This is Robert Gottlieb. This is a collection of his deadline prose, near-death experiences, where he just does what so many authors that we've seen in this bookshelf tour do. He just collects his own work, all the stuff that he was commissioned to review or to write about. Somebody needs a new introduction, somebody needs a new preface or something like that. And you've got that prose, and once it reverts to you, it's yours to do with as you please, so you make a book out of it. Why not? And I go back to this quite often. I certainly go back to this every time he writes on a subject that comes anywhere close to a subject that I'm writing on. And since I review almost exclusively nonfiction, that happens often. So I have this in a different place from his long-awaited memoir. His long-awaited memoir is over in biography. I think we saw that 10 years ago when this library tour started. 10 years ago at least. I have no idea how we're going to finish. My original idea was to finish this library tour in 2019. And I don't see how that's going to be possible. We're almost in November. We're just a couple of weeks away from November. A couple of weeks won't even get us finished with this wall. I think a way that several of you have very gently pointed out in your emails, I will, once again, I leave all my information down below. If you want to fund me on Patreon, if you want to follow me on Instagram, if you want, especially, since I obviously don't care about the money, of course I'd love it. I think if all of us set up Patreons, and each pledged $1, then well, anyway, the main thing is I will also leave my email, which I don't need to do, as a number of you have pointed out. If you Google my name, it's the first thing that comes up. But even so, quite a few of you have messaged me and said that one way that we could pick up the pace on this, especially since I lost some time while I was sick, that was unexpected, would be if I never stopped. Right now I'm taking weekends off from library book tours. Or what if I didn't do that? What if I did one every day? What if it was just a staple every day? I suppose that's possible. I can't believe how indulgent you all are. Anyway, let's move on. Let's move on here. I guess actually that doesn't work, right? If every single one of us set up a Patreon and every one of us donated $1 to everyone else, we'd all be poor. I guess my point isn't so much that as it is that we all know the direction that YouTube, just in general, as a platform, is headed. Right? You don't need to think about it more than a minute to realize that this platform is headed towards a paying model. How could it not be? And that, I think, would mean that if you watch a BookTube channel, a YouTube channel just in general, and you really like it, you will have to pay to watch it. I don't really like that. Well, in one way or another. I'm leaving the whole block of information down below, and you can do it as you please. Oh, okay. This is another critic in this library tour whose surname is Myers. Only this is a century before B.R. Myers. This is F.W.H. Myers. You can definitely tell the Edwardian and late Victorian period because they went in for multiple names. All the men had multiple names. And this is only 3 pieces. I was very happy to find this one. I found it this is what is this? 1897. And I was very happy to find it. I'm sure I found it at the Brattle. This is just 3 pieces. The author writes a long essay on Greek oracles, a long essay on Marcus Aurelius, or is it Marcus Antonius Pius? I think it might be Pius. Wouldn't that be something? Let's see. No, it's Marcus Aurelius. He writes a long essay on Marcus Aurelius, and he also writes a long essay on Virgil. And I had the Virgil essay somewhere else in some other collection. The Virgil essay is just beautiful, just fantastic. And then I found this, and that has all three. So where am I going to put this thing? We'll stick it right there. Okay, all right. This next one is a lovely trade paperback of a phenomenon, an author who represents a phenomenon that we've seen on this library tour, and we'll see many, many times, where an author whose fiction I don't like at all, I will have one or multiple copies, multiple volumes of their nonfiction, because of their nonfiction I think is their true calling. And that is definitely true of John Updike. We've already seen, what did we see? Due Considerations. And now we have More Matter. In this lovely, who is this? Random House. They did a uniform reprint of all of Updike. Just a whole shelf of his fiction looking just like this, with the line in the middle and the black on top. And this is a big volume of his biggest, I think, his biggest book of collected book writing. Yeah, everything under the sun. He never turned down a commission, so everybody is in here. Everybody. And I love it. I admit that without any hesitation. Over the years, especially over the last 15 years, I have grown to like Updike's occasional book prose a lot. I really do. There's a voice in it that's chatty and non-condescending. His fiction is so condescending, so incredibly condescending. And there's nothing like that. It's a totally different tonal register in the pieces that he wrote for introductions or for prefaces or for the New York Review of Books or whatever. It's a totally different John Updike. Palatable, bearable. So I don't know what accounts for that, but he is by no means the only author for whom that is true. Oh God! All right, okay, we mentioned this already. This is United States by Gore Vidal. His just massive omnium gatherum of all of the stuff that he wrote. So we saw him yesterday, didn't we, with an homage to Daniel Shays. We saw him, and there have been a bunch of other Gore Vidal slim volumes of essays, and this is everything. Although he did, I think, 2 volumes after this of essays, maybe 3, that get more and more unhinged. I think a couple of the later very short essay collections really shouldn't have been collected. He was a very strong-willed person, but he wasn't the only one making these decisions, and his publisher could have said no. Right? The publisher can always say no. His publisher should have said, this isn't doing your literary reputation, any credit at all, so let's not do this. But I don't have any of those, and I don't have to pay any attention to them. This, of course, is a doorstop masterpiece. The more Vidal at the height of his power that you can have in one book, the better I like it. I like I mentioned yesterday, I have a soft spot for an homage to Daniel Shays, just in terms of when it came out, what it meant to me, how much I reread it, how much I and my bookish friends at the time talked about it. And we weren't talking about its portable, detachable, reassemblable contents. We were talking about it as a book. And this is all the contents of that book, plus tons of other stuff. It's split into 3 parts. So you have the state of the art, the state of the union, and the state, very portentously, the 3rd section is called the state of being. And that's okay, that's fine. Vidal could do that any way he wants. I know that he wanted to make a massive book, and he did. And I know that he had other massive books in mind. Like, for instance, V.S. Pritchett did such a thing. The British writer V.S. Pritchett did an enormous book, even bigger than this one, of collected essays that were the same thing. And here it is. Here it sits on my shelf. I think there are only 2 Gore Vidal volumes in this room. I had Palimpsest. I think Palimpsest is a disarmingly brilliant memoir. There's more to it every time I read it, every time I reread it. But I believe that the last time I had a copy of Palimpsest, in fact, I think I got it on this channel. The last time I did, I think the first one of you that said, oh my God, it's always the same email. I'm sure that it's heartfelt. It's always a variation of the same thing. Oh my God, I saw you hold up Palimpsest by Gore Vidal. Oh my God, your description made me want to read it. It sounds like exactly the book for me. There isn't a used bookstore within 70 miles of me, and I don't want to use the internet. Well, I can understand completely not wanting to risk buying a used book on Amazon. I understand that completely, even a new book. And what am I going to do in a situation like that? Of course I'm going to send the book. So as a result, I think United States and an homage to Daniel Shays is the only Gore Vidal in this room, when Palimpsest should be too. And maybe Julian, hit one of his novels, Julian, should also be in this room. We'll find out. I don't know when we will, but we'll find out. Oh, okay, here's another. These ought to be together. This is An Evening Colonnade by Cyril Connolly. Just another, a much bigger collection than his collected essays. They ought to be together. We saw the selected essays just yesterday, right? And this one, I mentioned there, one of my favorite pieces by him. This has all sorts of personal reminiscences, glimpses of famous people that he's known, literary essays, deadline prose of all kinds, just every literary figure in the world. But I don't think this has his fantastic piece on book reviewing. I don't think it does. No, I'm not seeing it. I don't think that it's in here. And I if I remember correctly, there are a few other things that aren't either. So it's not an overlap. So in that case, it's worthwhile having both. Let's see here. Oh, okay. All right. We shift from collections of deadline prose to literary memoir. I mentioned that there's all kinds of things here, and this is one of those. This is The Happy Profession by Ellery Sedgwick, who was an editor of the Atlantic Monthly. We've seen at least one other Atlantic Monthly book in this library tour. Here's another one. There are a few others. There was a time when the Atlantic Monthly's editor was the foremost literary figure of the United States. And even people who weren't all that literary, even people who didn't have anything published of their own or who weren't out and about in literary salons, could still tell you. You would mention Ellery Sedgwick or whoever, and they would be able to tell you what number Atlantic Monthly editor that person was. Were they the 6th editor? Were they the 7th? Were they the 8th? Those days are long gone. Editors don't have that kind of cachet anymore. But once upon a time they did. And Ellery Sedgwick was a nice guy. A nice, gentle, encouraging guy in a profession that even then didn't have all that many of them. He was soft-spoken. He was charming. He had read everything. And he had, I think, mathematically an infinite number of ways to get around paying his authors. He had an infinite number of ways to get around that. An author would come into the office and say, I've been waiting, and I've been waiting, and I've been waiting. My essay on, President Garfield or whatever has run and long since, and yet there's no payment. And if you consult your books, you'll see that you have not paid me, and I would like it if you would pay me. And Sedgwick would say, "Oh, my dear boy, you're entirely right. Oh, things are a mess around here, as you can tell." And the person would look around at a perfectly neat office. And Sedgwick would say, "How about we pop around the corner to lunch? I'll treat." And the person would get filled with lunch, maybe a little champagne, and then they would waddle off. And then 2 months later, they would come back and say, I just must know what's going on here. You still haven't paid me. And Sedgwick would say, "Oh, things have been so hectic. How about we repair for a spot of lunch? How would that be?" He used to have authors say that if he doesn't pay me, I'm just going to have him treat me to an elaborate lunch 5 times, and that'll be what he owes me. Magazine editors still try stuff like that, but not in person, and not nearly as charmingly anymore. There are still some places where you absolutely have to dun your editor for payment. It's much rarer than it ever was. It's much rarer since we all became electronic, since everything became electronic, and since at the touch of a button you could see exactly what you had to do, and you can leave electronic reminders for yourself and whatnot. Usually now I have found that it's an electronic problem. Usually I have found now that if I'm tremendously in arrears, if some editor hasn't paid me in forever, and I've mentioned it a couple of times, usually what both of us will decide is that a computer must have made a mistake somewhere along the line, and that someone, not a literary person, not an editorial person, but someone from tech, needs to sit down with the system and do whatever it is they do. And invariably the person from tech will say, "Yeah, the computer thought that it had done that. I have now instructed it that it is wrong, and everything's fixed. uh, oh my. Okay. All right. This is An Artificial Wilderness by Sven Burkitt. Look at that. Our Golden Boy doesn't look like that anymore. This is from the 1980s, is it? Let's see here. 1987, when the whole world made sense. And this is Burkitt's on all sorts of 20th century writers. God almighty. Joseph Roth, Heinrich Boll, Thomas Bernhard. Oh my. Marguerite Duras, Primo Levi, Umberto Eco, Malcolm Lowry, V.S. Naipaul. Okay. There's just a long, and then there's to my delight, the part of this that I reread the most, there's an end section. There's an end section here that is general essays, where it isn't so much him writing, about Borges, where it's the 50th Borges essay that you've read in your life. Rather that it's him writing about certain bookish things. One of the essays in here, if I remember correctly, is on rereading. I think that's in this book. Yes, rereading, and it's really, really good. But even on authors, he can be really, really good. If I remember correctly, his Umberto Eco essay is really, really good. I revisit, like I said, with so many of these books. It's not systematic. My revisiting them is not systematic, and a question will come up. A question will come up, and I will suddenly need to know what half these people think about. Like, for instance, Umberto Eco. Like, for instance, what's an example? There was a novel a couple of years ago. There was a novel about French semiotics that I actually ended up really liking. And Eco is a minor character in that book, and so are a whole bunch of other people. So when I'd finished with that book, and I was mulling it in my head, I knew I liked it. I knew I wanted to reread it when I got the finished copy and then write a review of it. When I knew that, I came to this bookcase. I've mentioned many times, I come to these bookcases, these writerly bookcases. I actually come here and stand, shift weight from foot to foot, pull things off, hold a couple in the arm like that, hold your finger down the crack of the book, and just stand there reading. I do that with this bookcase, and I do that with the Penguin Wall. I don't do that with anything else. With any other bookcase, I go with a discrete thing in mind. I pull the book off the shelf, and I go to where I'm working. I go to the couch, I go to the bed, or I go to my desk. But I don't just stand there, lost in wonder. I do that at this wall. And with that book, what was it, The 7 Types of Ambiguity? Something was that? It was called something like that. It had an axe on the cover. It was quite good. I'll remember, and I'll leave a link to it down below. But when I read that and knew that I was going to be writing about it, I immediately wanted to know what half these writers write about the modern era. Half of them are from the 20th century. I immediately wanted to know what they all said about semiotics and what they all said about Umberto Eco. And I reread Sven Burkitt's on him. I reread a bunch of other people on that. J.M. Coetzee was on that as well. I think Joyce Carol Oates. But anyway, you know what I mean. So it's just to underscore that these books are not dead. I have many, many books that I hate to say it, but if anything's going to underscore the truth of it, it's a library tour. I have a number of books that are effectively dead, which means I ought not to have them. I know that that's heresy. There are all sorts of library tours going on. All my brethren in the gigantic library community of BookTube are all doing library tours, and they're not saying anything like this, but I definitely am. I must be in a different point in my library ownership than they are. Certainly I own fewer, you'd never believe it from this library tour, but I own fewer books now than I ever have when I wasn't traveling. And I would like to cut this number in half. And part of the thing that would go, I mean, you saw it, I'm looking across the way here at my biography section. How many biographies of Edward VI did I have? How many? It's ridiculous. Absolutely ridiculous. But these are not the same. These I come and consult. Oh, okay. All right. Here's himself again. This is Hugging the Shore, another collection by John Updike. Incredibly insufferable. I know you're looking at that picture and you're thinking, ha ha ha, what a nice, friendly, affable guy. There he is on Cape Cod, sitting in a boat. Ha ha ha. Don't be fooled. That is not what that picture is. That is someone who wanted to look fey and overcome by amusement and totally unguarded, and who took probably 100 takes to look that way, and who was willing to throw things, including little rocks from the bottom of that boat, pick them up and throw them the 10 feet at the person who was doing the photography. No, 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 no. And then, give me a count of 3. but that artificiality, that stage, horrible, stiff artificiality that is all throughout his books like kudzu, his novels, is nowhere to be found in his nonfiction. So I have another volume of nonfiction. Now, ideally, it belongs right next to More Matter and Due Considerations. And our next book, which is Odd Jobs, is another huge book of his collected nonfiction. This gives you an idea of how much of this stuff he wrote. And this isn't all of them. There are 2 other books at least that I know, including a large book on art. He was a very engaged, enthusiastic spectator of art at art museums. The art book is well worth reading. I don't care so much for art criticism except for the great Robert Hughes, so I don't have it, and I don't think I would get it if I saw it. But once again, we have the contrast. Never worked in a field in his life, and is here meant to look like the old Yankee salt of the earth, who you've interrupted him briefly while he's out, hoeing the back 40. But no, this was 200 takes with a very well-paid photographer in order to get just the right thing, and who would have clods of dirt thrown at them if they got it wrong. But that prima donna tweeness is nowhere to be found inside the book itself. So I come back to these things all the time. I ought to see, now that I think about it, if Odd Jobs and Hugging the Shore exist in these editions. I really like this paperback, and I think that Random House did all of them in this format. And that'd be a thing to go to Book Depository and get, instead of having this big thing. But well, you get the point. I don't like Updike's prose at all, his fiction at all. But I could read him all day long on books and authors. Okay, all right. Here's the last book for this time around, and this is a hardcover to replace a hardcover. I have a crappy condition hardcover that I was just waiting until I found a perfect condition replacement, and I knew that I would at the Brattle. You still routinely see this at the Brattle, but not all that often, and not for very much longer, I would imagine. This is a book that I have talked about on this channel before. I have fulminated against its title many times before, and praised its contents. This is But Do Blondes Prefer Gentlemen? Homage to Court Youp and Other Writings by Anthony Burgess, the author of Clockwork Orange. And the title stinks, of course. Both of the titles do. The one refers to an advertising jingle, and the other refers to the top rank of a manual typewriter keyboard. And both make no sense, and both were flights of fancy at the last minute, and both were examples of how this author thought he was the cleverest thing in clogs and just needed to be told otherwise. Occasionally needed to be told otherwise. There are a million different candidates in the body of this book alone, in its own text, for much better titles. But titles aside, this is a large collection of Burgess occasional prose, and it is brilliant. Brilliant. Just incredible. I am a big fan of Anthony Burgess. I'm a big fan of his prose, of his fiction. There's quite a bit of it that I reread, which is kind of rare for me when it comes to contemporary fiction. But I've been rereading this book. I'm done rereading it, but I reread it all summer. I took the other version, the crappy version that I have, and I put it in the bathroom, right on the seat of ease. And some of you, all of you are younger, so you will think of the bathroom as a place where you go and briskly transact business. But after a certain time, after a certain time, the bathroom, the seat of ease, is going to represent for you a significant period of waiting. You're going to do a lot of waiting for the train to pull into the station. And so I have a stack of books there, and I was slowly, savoringly rereading this all summer long, and boy oh boy, I've been saying I like Updike. I like his nonfiction, his writing about books and authors. I like it quite a bit, and I like, for instance, Gore Vidal. I've always thought Gore Vidal was a fantastic writer, but boy oh boy, even here there are ranks of talent. When you put Gore Vidal and John Updike against Cyril Connolly and Anthony Burgess doing the exact same thing, sometimes on the exact same writer, and occasionally, most damningly of all, on the exact same book, when you line them up like that, there is no comparison whatsoever. There's just none whatsoever. There might have been a chance of it with Vidal if he hadn't been so incredibly self-obsessed, but he was. So, I mean, not to say that Anthony Burgess, of course, was incredibly self-obsessed, and Cyril Connolly legitimately thought that the planet should be renamed after him. But there's a way to suppress it, right? There's a way to suppress it when you have to, and Vidal never could. He was never ever able to do it. He was never able to do that, not for any length of time at all. Whereas Anthony Burgess and Cyril Connolly could, and to miraculous effect. Well, that's great. That's fantastic. All right, so I'm going to wrap this up. That is this shelf, and now I'm going to get to work on reorganizing it just a little. I'm making a mental note to save the reorganization, the wholesale reorganization, until this whole thing is done. But I can at least put all the Updikes together. Right? I mean, that's the work of a minute to do here. As long as I leave it at a minute, as long as I don't say, all right, well, now that I've done that, what about if I do this? What about if I do that? That's deadly. I'm going to try not to do that. But I'm going to wrap this up for now, but we'll be back. We'll do another shelf tomorrow, and maybe I'll consider doing Saturday and Sunday as well. I mean, you can always skip the videos if you want, right? That would at least get us, give us a chance at getting more of this. It would give us an extra week. I don't think that would make a difference, though. Well, I'll mull over it, and we'll see. But in the meantime, this is going on long enough, so I will wrap this up. But I will be back. Thank you, BookTube.